Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm super excited to be here with you today. If you are tuning in, I want to know where you're tuning in from. Put your name and location in the comments so that we can give you a shout out and know where everybody's tuning in from. We've got a great show for you today. We've got Saskia from Blue Yonder. She's joining me today on Thoughts and Coffee. And then we're going to dive even deeper into some of these topics tomorrow on the LinkedIn Live. So as we go through the show, we're going to be putting up a QR code in the top right-hand corner. That's going to link to that LinkedIn Live for tomorrow so that you can go and grab your seat, even if you can't attend live. Click the attend button. We'll send you the link so that you can watch it. Anyways, we do need to give a shout out to our show sponsor, and that is the Secret Society of Supply Chain.com. It's our newest membership group, free for everybody to join. Want to give a shout out to our newest members. We've got Christopher Price, Kevin Packerson, and we've got Tendra Sharma, and I apologize if I butchered that name, but go and head over to Secret Society of Supply Chain because we've got a lot of great things happening over in our membership. Now it's time to talk about what's happening at Let's Talk Supply Chain. So we've got a brand new episode 514, turning strategic planning into retail profitability with Anaplan. We released that yesterday, getting some great feedback on that. So go and check it out wherever you listen or watch the show, Apple, Spotify. It's over on the Let's Talk Supply Chain YouTube as well. So go and check that out. Plus, tomorrow, I just mentioned it, Saskia is going to be back with me tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we're talking about from compliance to competitive edge, the case for sustainable supply chains. I can't wait for that one. I think it's coming back into the priority for a lot of organizations, which we're going to talk about today, especially around fast fashion. So definitely click the attend button, either join us tomorrow or watch the recording. And then next week, join us for lunch. We're doing a bit of a lunch and learn with OneRail. We're talking about beyond checkboxes, turning security standards into competitive advantage. So again, click the attend button. Even if you can't attend live, we're going to make sure that you get that recording and you know what's going on because we're going to be talking about all sorts of great stuff. All right. Next, I think I announced this last week. We've got Let's Talk Supply Chain Europe that we are building in for 2026. So head over there. We've got some great articles and some stories around what's happening in supply chain in Europe. Click the follow button and follow along as we go through 2026 and what we're going to be launching there. All right. In-person conferences, where are we going to be? Manifest is coming up February 9th through 11th in Las Vegas. And if you haven't registered, make sure you go over there, register, get your ticket today. We are doing a lot there. We have the Masters of Innovation Awards that we are going to be giving out alongside Supply Chain Brain. I'm going to be on stage with a Viro 360. Plus, we're recording a whole bunch of podcasts on site, and I'm going to be on stage there as well. Then, of course, we've got TPM happening in Long Beach, California, March 1st through 4th. I just found out I'm going to get to be on stage there as well. Plus, I'm going to be hosting TPM Live, and we've got some fun stuff happening over there too. So make sure to register for that. All right. I've got a brand new personal newsletter, the monthly pop. If you haven't subscribed to it, go and check it out. We are hitting the ground running at the beginning of this year. Opportunity, connection, self-worth, the power of showing up. We've had some great feedback on this. So go and check it out. I would love to hear from you as to what you thought about it. And then we've got a brand new episode of Blended Podcast. And this is all about DEI. How is it shaping? How are we wordsmithing? When we're wordsmithing, what does that mean for us? And so much more. And you can find that over on Apple and Spotify. We don't release the video for specific reasons, but if you want to listen to the audio version, head over to Apple and Spotify as well. All right. Now it is time to bring up our guest for today. I'm super excited. Saskia, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sarah. So great to be with you again.
How are you doing? I think you were at NRF this week, right?
I have been at NRF. It's been fantastic. So for those in the know, NRF is the National Retail Federation, meets every year, huge event in New York in the beginning of the year. It kind of kicks off the year, especially for retail. I came from retail before I was at Blue Yonder, so very passionate about sustainability in retail, and great to be back with that community.
Awesome. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that, I think, a little bit later on in the show. But for anybody who doesn't know you, tell us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about Blue Yonder.
So I am Saskia van Gendt, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Blue Yonder, and I oversee both our internal sustainability program, so everything that Blue Yonder is doing around being responsible for our own carbon footprint and our own operations, as well as how we're modifying our solutions to support our customers' sustainability goals. Blue Yonder is an end-to-end supply chain platform that covers planning, warehousing, transportation, returns, and all powered by a network and a platform and AI to really power global supply chains.
Awesome. I love that. And we're going to hear even more about that as well. We've got a lot of people tuning in on my personal LinkedIn. Just want to give a little bit of a shout out. We've got Mohammed, we've got Jacob, Lindsay, Phil. It's so great to see everybody. And remember, if you're loving the conversation, we want to see some fire emojis in the comments as well. So make sure to add those in there. All right. So let's get to our poll. We ask everybody in our Let's Talk Supply Chain community on a Wednesday morning, we ask everybody a question of the week, because really we want to know where you're at. We want to know how you're thinking about things, and the community really likes it because they come together and we talk about the different topics. So what is the biggest barrier preventing your supply chain from becoming more sustainable? Now, we had just about 60 votes, just under 60 votes here. We had 41% say cost and ROI concerns, 33% said poor data quality, 14% said limited automation tools, and 12% said supplier transparency gaps. Saskia, this is your world. What did you think about the results on this? Are they surprising? Would you have liked to have seen it shuffled a little bit differently? What do you think?
I mean, it definitely resonates from what we're hearing from customers. I think just on the first point about ROI, one of the kind of compelling things about sustainable supply chain is that there's opportunities to reduce costs throughout your supply chain, whether that's fuel expenses, avoiding disruptions, that actually can pay for some of the sustainability benefits that you can accrue. So we actually see it as a virtuous cycle of being able to invest more sustainable supply chains and really seeing that ROI have a really short payback period. Tons of value around automating data collection, which I know is one of the other top points and pain points that we hear all the time from customers, is how much time it takes to collect all of that data from your internal and external partners, harmonize it to global standards for reporting. There's even more pressure for companies to report on sustainability standards. That takes time, and of course, technology plays a huge role in automating that. So I would say the top two definitely resonate with what we're hearing from customers.
Well, and I think it's also, how do we turn that concern around cost and ROI into competitive advantage? What does that look like? I think that goes hand in hand a lot of times with supply chains and looking at it less as a cost center, but more as a revenue driver. What does that look like? How do we change the mindset of how it's helping the organization in different ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the benefits that we see in sustainable supply chain are resilience. So we know that there's tons of disruptions happening across all global supply chains, whether that's climate related, leading to droughts that are disrupting food supply chains, sea level rise and fall that could be affecting even things like the Panama Canal Passage. So those disruptions that are largely from climate change lead to disruptions in the supply chain itself. So that's where having the technology to be able to quickly pivot between suppliers, transportation routes, to ultimately save time and save costs in your supply chain can really benefit that investment at the upfront.
Yeah, I love that. And we're going to be talking a lot more about that in our LinkedIn Live tomorrow. Just a friendly reminder, QR code up in the top right-hand corner. Click that. click the attend button, come and join us tomorrow, or we'll send you the recording afterwards. Now, this is the part of the show where I ask for a bit of a market update, and you're in a bit of a unique position because you've literally just come off of NRF, and I'm sure that you have talked to hundreds of people. What is everybody talking about? What's the market update? What's the sentiment? How are people thinking about supply chains? So talk to us about what that's looked like over the last couple of days.
Yeah, well, you're right. I've definitely talked to hundreds of people. I was losing my voice on Sunday, so I'm glad that it's back for our conversation. So one of the exciting things about NRF this year is the kind of spinoff of NRF Rev, which is about reverse logistics. And this is an area that Blue Yonder, my company, has really been investing in, especially around returns management. Mm-hmm. And this is a major pain point for retailers. And it's not just fashion retail. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about fashion today, but it really hits across so many different sectors. And we heard that loud and clear, everything from electronics, eyewear, beauty. There's so many pain points that retailers are feeling around returns. And some of the themes that I was really excited to hear were around re-commerce, reducing waste, and also remanufacturing. So a lot of retailers are really seeing re-commerce as an opportunity to take returns back and not just send them into one liquidation channel, but to have more detailed dispositioning that can send those materials or products into a number of different channels. That might be return to vendor, resale, recycling. Preferentially, they're also doing re-inventory quickly so that they can sell those returns, back to customers. So a big theme around how re-commerce fits into the reverse logistics frameworks. The second one that I was really excited to hear about was remanufacturing. So not just taking products back, but making them new again so that they can be sold back to customers. This is kind of the holy grail when it comes to the circular economy. I heard from electronics and home goods manufacturers that they're not just taking those products back, but they're making them into new products that can be sold again. And so that's really exciting to hear. And I think the other takeaway there is that it's not just a kind of feel good thing that these companies are doing. It is profitable and ultimately paying for itself.
Well, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the poll, in the fact that 41% of them said the biggest thing is cost and ROI. Well, it depends where we're looking in the supply chain as to what we want to focus on first when it comes to sustainability. And maybe this is the opportunity that everybody is looking for, right? Because returns are extremely costly. We've talked about this on the show and a variety of different shows across Let's Talk Supply Chain about how costly returns really are. And there's only a handful that are really getting it right. And so what does that look like? And so I love the fact that you're talking about how we can take those returns, have less waste, focus on sustainability, but create more revenue streams for the business that is ultimately tied to supply chain, right? Like that is the ROI, the new products, the new revenue lines, et cetera, et cetera. That is the new ROI, I think, on sustainability.
Yeah, and I think if you think about how much investment has already gone into making that product, you have to buy the raw materials, you have to work with your manufacturing partners, you have to get that product to the store location or to the e-commerce location. That takes a ton of time and a ton of cost. So the company's already invested in producing that material and that product. If they're getting it back in good condition, they want to be able to sell that product and to recoup the revenue that they've invested. So this is where you're really seeing a shift from liquidation into resale or re-inventory. The other thing that's pretty interesting is the regulatory landscape that's putting pressure on companies to make sure that they're paying attention to waste. So I heard a lot of conversation around the California regulations specific to packaging and to fashion and footwear. So in California now, companies have to sign on to make sure that there's end-of-life options for apparel and footwear. So there's consortia that are being formed. Hopefully new recycling systems will be set up. But ultimately, there's going to be responsibility. It's through these extended producer responsibility programs put back on the companies to develop end-of-life solutions. So again, it's not just the right thing to do. It's also cost-effective and now also regulated, which really reinforces the need.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is a great segue into the first article, which you actually wrote for Fast Company. But I wanted to just pin down something that you just said in regards to the fact that this regulation is coming through California. A lot of what we've heard about is coming through Europe. And so a lot of North American brands have been like, okay, it's in Europe. It's not here yet, but now it's here, right? So I wanted to point that out because I think that's a really, really big deal before we get into that first article. I want to say hi to Jacob. He's given us, excuse me, our first 3 fire emojis. And then we've got Karn21K over on Let's Talk Supply Chain Instagram as well. All right. So let's talk about this first article. Now, you wrote this for Fast Company, and it talks about fashion waste. I mean, this is not the first time on this show that I have talked about fast fashion and fashion waste. Usually it's with Audrey, my trade bestie, who joins me sometimes as a guest on the show, because she's very passionate about it. She's been very involved in the fashion industry in Toronto as well. And it's a big concern. I mean, when I was reading this article, you did a great job of articulating what it actually means, not only to the business, the consumer, but also what it means to the supply chains. And excess inventory, what you said, it costs $140 billion in lost sales. And we actually overproduce fashion in the billions. So talk to me about this. Why was this article so important to write? What were you hoping that, the audience who's reading it, what were you hoping that they were taking away from that? And how can we change our approach to what's happening in fashion?
Yeah, I think it really underscores the points we were just making around returns and some of the supply chain opportunities specific to the fashion industry. And you mentioned billions of garments being wasted. There's been estimates between 2.5 and 5 billion garments wasted every year. So That's an enormous problem and points to the need for both upstream and downstream solutions to address that. One of the things that I think is a kind of burgeoning but kind of missed opportunity so far is around using planning solutions to better estimate the demand for fashion garments. And this is where we see there's still a ton of overstock of production and unsold goods. And going back to our conversation around the cost that's associated with producing and the logistics associated with actually getting those products into store, we know that there's already that upfront investment. So having overstock, which you ultimately have to pay or liquidate, is a huge cost burden for customers. Now there's so much intelligence that can come from planning solutions. You can take in huge data sets that are factoring into all different kinds of micro trends and demand and weather changes that can inform your inventory at a really localized level that allow you to better estimate your overall inventory plans, your manufacturing plans, and really dial in that production to meet that demand. So that's really exciting to think about those upfront opportunities. The second one is, the return side of it. And we know that, many companies are producing 150 products with the goal to sell 100. So how do we use returns as a way to feed back to your inventory plans and avoid that overproduction? So if you have 50 t-shirts coming back through your returns process, how can you educate your inventory plans to not overproduce those products? So the connectivity across the supply chain is a huge opportunity. And we talked a little bit about the regulations in California. That is really pressing. And again, it hits at not just the global companies that are involved in fashion, but also more localized companies that are in the US that are selling in California. They'll also have to comply. But at the same time, there is an interesting regulation in Europe that is preventing the disposal, which includes recycling. So not just landfilling, but also recycling of unsold garments. Wow. So as of this year, companies are having to report excess production and how they're managing that inventory and really looking for channels to sell inventory in the first place. So I think that'll go back to the first point where they're going to have to dial in their plans, their inventory plans, not overproduce in the first place, and make sure there's good resale and channels to get those products on people.
I love that you brought that up, because one of the things that stood out for me in that article too was that you said that waste should be addressed before the product enters supply chain. And I think the Europeans have it right with that mentality and the fact that before you produce the product and it ends up in supply chain and moving throughout, the world, what are you going to do about it if it's not consumed, if it's overproduced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're actually thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead rather than reacting in the moment when that product isn't sold.
Absolutely. And that's where not only can you have the most cost benefit from that upstream planning, but also you can avoid all of the upstream environmental footprint of producing the product. The sustainability folks in the audience will know that most of the footprint actually comes upstream, whether that's producing the yarn, dyeing it, extracting all the materials and getting it into the store in the first place. So the more that you can plan and avoid that upstream production for a product that isn't going to sell, the better both the bottom line and the environmental footprint.
Yeah. And you talk about AI, you talk about ML, you talk about scenario planning and how all of that can come into play to really help to do that. So highly recommend you go and check out the article. I would love after the show, Saskia, if you could send me some information about the European regulations and we can put that through our Let's Talk Supply Chain Europe as well. Because I think it's really important that everybody knows what's happening over there because now it's coming into, you can see it with California and it's starting to, sneak into what we're doing here in North America. So super important to keep an eye on. All right, let's get to our second article. So this is about automated supply chains turn fragmented operations into agile ecosystems. Now, this was written by the director of industry strategy for Clio, which is another fashion brand. So we're kind of on fashion today. And I wanted to bring this to light because a lot of what he's saying in this particular article is what we were talking about in like 24, 25 about being competitive advantage. It's now competitive standard. And I think it's important that we talk about this. You were talking about disruptions like climate, labor, digital infrastructure. He talks about this in his article too. So, people are talking about this. This is how they're thinking about agility. This is how they're thinking about visibility. It's business imperative and table stakes. It's no longer just competitive advantage. What did you think of this particular article? What stood out for you?
I think one of the takeaways was how siloed organizations and supply chains still are and the opportunity to unify data and decisioning across supply chains. And we see that all the time with different types of customers that, especially larger customers, they kind of need to be siloed just to have a divide and conquer approach. But when it comes to technology, that's where there's an opportunity to unify all of the data and all of the different decisions that have to happen across the supply chain. And we see huge benefits, not just from cost reduction, resilience, but also with sustainability. So for example, going back to the fashion example, if you see a merchandise plan and an inventory plan changing your carbon footprint, that can roll all the way into your warehousing, your transportation can go up, your returns can go up. So if you have that single visibility to show how decisions in one part of the supply chain can affect other points, then you have a net benefit and triple bottom line benefit because you'll be able to react more proactively in the front end to avoid those downstream impacts.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you probably heard this at NRF. In this article, they talk about retailers talking about rising costs. And it's mostly because of the fact that the supply chains need to be transparent because the fallout of that is costly. So they didn't actually name, tariffs. They didn't actually name specific disruptions. I mean, they did, but they're really talking about that transparency being table stakes because the fallout of that is costly, right? They didn't talk about tariffs in rising costs. They talked about that specifically, which I thought was really interesting because if we can get the supply chains, the transparency, the visibility, the agility right, then actually the cost of producing and the rising costs of what's happening right now don't necessarily need to be passed on to consumers.
Yeah, that was one of my takeaways too, is that the disruptions are very costly and also avoidable. So we think a lot about a network approach where if you have your direct suppliers and indirect suppliers all on one network, then you can respond in real time to those disruptions. So if there is a manufacturing shortage or a raw material shortage, you have other suppliers that you can go to. Same thing with transportation. You can quickly change routes, change transportation providers. So that allows for that agility and the ability to react in real time. We also use a network effect to evaluate the ESG performance of all of those suppliers and even the climate risk of all of those suppliers. So there's a lot of power in having that network visibility. And ultimately, I think a lot of companies are going in that direction around supply chain management through a network approach.
Yeah. Now we've got a couple of questions from Lindsay over on my personal LinkedIn. So Lindsay, I'm going to ask one of them, and then the other one we'll get Saskia to jump on LinkedIn and answer you directly. So actually, no, it was Michelle's question. So Lindsay, Saskia is going to answer your question a little bit later. Many companies are exercising their option to destroy products subject to high tariffs when there is excess. How are you seeing this factor into sustainability conversations?
Well, first, I think there's a lot more awareness, just a public awareness around the waste from supply chains. And we see more press and more just understanding that there is overproduction in fashion, and even the fast fashion cycles and micro trends are leading to a lot of excess waste. So there is a bit of like name and shame that kind of comes out too. So we've seen press around brands that have a lot of disposal. Sometimes they're even reporting it in their annual or quarterly reports, and people pull it out and call them out on it. So there is a lot of responsibility just to address that in a responsible way, not just because of the regulations that I mentioned, but also because the reputational impacts from that can be really significant. The best brands, I think, are looking proactively to dial in their inventory plans like we were talking about, making sure that they have much more of a tailored inventory plan to match that demand and not overproduce in the first place. But then also look at those downstream opportunities around re-commerce, around resale, looking at even recycling programs. So there's a lot more diversity in how we can manage excess inventory or excess returns when they do occur.
Yeah, such a great question. Thank you, Michelle. We might actually use that question in the LinkedIn Live tomorrow. And again, if you haven't clicked the button to attend, click the QR code. That's going to take you to the event. We'd love to see you tomorrow. Let's do Lindsay's question. We might not do the third article. So in the EU, brands cannot landfill or recycle unsold products. That's the question.
Yeah, so the regulation is rolling out now, and it's been progressive in its approach. First, it required fashion brands to disclose how much excess inventory they were producing, and then it ratchets down to preventing them from disposing of it or recycling it. And it really goes back to the issue of overproduction and not having those downstream ways to manage those materials.
Right.
It's going to be really interesting to see how it rolls out. I think it originally started in France and then ultimately became an EU-wide initiative. But we know that Europe is getting really aggressive on sustainability. There's a lot of pressure up and down from shareholders, consumers, companies are really responding to both the waste and also the carbon footprint that comes from fashion and other companies. So I think it's going to be something that we continue to monitor, because as you pointed out, the regulations are kind of getting copied over here in the US, especially if you look at California, Oregon, Washington. They're essentially taking the best learnings from Europe and taking them into state practice.
Yeah, great question, Lindsay. And join us tomorrow because we'd love to know if you have any other questions as well. All right, real quick, we've got about a minute left. So I do want to highlight the last article because I said we were going to talk about storytelling. We're going to put the article in the comments so that you can go and read up on this and check it out. The reason why I wanted to bring this up within the supply chain community is the fact that companies are hiring for storytellers. There was 70,000 listings on LinkedIn for storytellers. And I think it's important, right? I think the fact that you and I are doing this show today and you're a guest on the show and you're doing a great job of telling the story around sustainability. And it's really powerful and it makes an impact, I think, in organizations, but also professionals' lives as well. So just wanted to point this out. Do you have any quick thoughts on this particular article, Saskia?
I mean, it resonated with me. I think stories are memorable. People can really grasp on to the nuance of a story and take it with them and replicate it and share it with others. So it goes back to fireside chats and that storytelling that can be passed on from generation to generation. So it's something that's kind of timeless. I also think it brings a really important human element to our technology and AI focus, right? We still need people that can go back and tell those stories and feel that personal connection. So I think partly it's a response to the era that we're in with all the technology.
And how we learn, right? I think it's really how we learn and how we retain information, how we really feel good about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So highly recommend you go and check out that article. We're a couple of seconds over, but I want to say thank you so much to everybody who asked a question, gave us a fire emoji, told us where you were tuning in from. Thank you so much for being part of the show today. I'm going to be back next week. And Saskia, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It was such a pleasure, and I cannot wait until tomorrow.
Can't wait. See you tomorrow.